Welcome back, everybody. Today's video is Struggles of the 1970s. Quite a number of vocabulary terms for the day. So read through them, make sure you know them prior to finishing the video. Let's start by taking a look at Jimmy Carter as the President of the United States. We'll kick it off by mentioning right off the bat that Carter is a Washington outsider. And what's important to note about this is that plays very well in the eyes of voters in 1976 because of the credibility gap. Keep in mind, Ford had pardoned Nixon. Nixon was a president that had to resign in disgrace. And Carter was somebody that was not a lifelong politician. He was pictured and portrayed as somebody as an everyday person, wore jeans, was a peanut farmer, and this made him of interest in the eyes of many because he was not government. He was not a lifelong politician. Successes for Jimmy Carter during his presidency, not only during the presidency, but after and a long time after his presidency. One of his greatest successes is his efforts in human rights. Another success was Jimmy Carter brokered the Camp David Accords. This was an agreement. It was first a meeting at Camp David in the United States between the countries of Egypt and Israel. Egypt and Israel did not see eye to eye, to say the least, and Egypt, ever since Israel's creation as a state, did not recognize Israel as a state. So there were a number of things decided upon here in Camp David, including Egypt recognizing Israel and Israel no longer occupying the Sinai Peninsula. But for Jimmy Carter, that was a success that took place in 1977. Before Nixon left office, there were some struggles, and then there were continued struggles throughout the rest of the 1970s. As mentioned in a previous video, there is an economic issue and an energy issue during the Nixon presidency, and this continues through much of the 1970s. The economic issue is stagflation, and if you look at the right side of the graphic, you see two pieces of information: rate of inflation, and then beneath that, US unemployment rate. You'll notice the rate of inflation is really high. 8.8 is definitely a high mark, high rate of inflation, and it does go higher than that. At the same time, unemployment rate, 4.95, 5.3, all of that would be okay for the United States, but then you see it starts to increase. When you have increasing inflation or a high rate of inflation and you have a high unemployment rate, it leads to a stagnant economy, and this is stagflation. The energy issues of the time are impacted by OPEC, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. OPEC is not very old at this time. It was newly created, and they hold an embargo of their oil. It's a worldwide embargo, but the United States is definitely impacted by it. The United States' main supplier of oil is Saudi Arabia, and Saudi Arabia is part of OPEC. And on the left, you can see how impactful the oil prices are, how high they go, especially from where they were in 1970. And then in the middle column, you see the impact of it. One of the most common pictures you'll see that come out of the US in the 1970s are the long lines at gas stations waiting for gasoline. Continued struggles of the 1970s. In 1975, Vietnam, which was at the end of 1973 still North and South Vietnam, North being communist, the South not, Vietnam falls in 1975 and becomes one country, but is communist. So for the United States that fought a war of containment, this was seen as a failure. Later in Jimmy Carter's presidency, there is the Iran hostage crisis. The United States was sympathetic to the Shah of Iran. Iran was the Shah was pro United States, but he had cancer. The United States took him in, and when they do take him in, Iran goes through a revolution. And during that revolution, the US embassy in Iran is stormed, and there are people taken hostage. And this consumes much of the final year of Jimmy Carter's presidency. The hostages are eventually released, but I believe it is 444 days that the hostage crisis lasts. So it lasts for a long, long time, and they are not released until after Jimmy Carter leaves office. Finally, Jimmy Carter addresses the nation about the energy crisis and gives the crisis of confidence speech, in which he tells Americans that he is surprised that they do not think that the future will be better than they think it will be. And instead of Jimmy Carter coming on and talking about the energy crisis and stating what will be done about it, he kind of goes after the lack of confidence that citizens have in the United States and tells them how kind of caught off guard he is. So it doesn't build up the belief of the United States, and he's often accused of poor leadership during this time as the 1970s come to a close. Moving on to some societal changes in the 1970s. Within the United States, there is a lot of migration happening during this time, as you can see from the map. And what you'll notice that in that the Midwest and specifically on the East Coast, there's a lot of movement out. Overall, the Midwest doesn't lose a whole lot of population, but this is Sunbelt migration, a lot of movement into southern states and out west. Um, for the United States. There's also a lot of immigration coming in from Latin America and Asia at this time. As for that Sun Belt migration, it's a lot of people looking for a better climate, sure, but the Rust Belt is starting to have some issues regarding jobs. And sure enough, there are jobs to be found elsewhere in the United States. Beyond that, counterculture in the 1960s was a movement that was rather localized still. It was not something that had a huge popularity, a large following, but that starts to change as we enter and move through the 1970s. Counterculture starts to spread in popularity and becomes a little bit more of the norm. Finally, there is a rise in Christian fundamentalism. If we look at some statistics such as divorce rates, those are up. Babies that are born out of wedlock, those are up. The court case Roe v. Wade that legalized abortions, this is another one of those uh, historical events that occurs, and then some of the reaction to that is a rise in Christian fundamentalism. And then counterculture, some of the reaction to that, wanting traditional family values to return. All of this is are reasons. All of these items are reasons for a rise in Christian fundamentalism. If we look at the rise of Christian fundamentalism, along with the growing conservative values of law and order and traditional values at the same time, it makes for a good fit. And that's certainly what we see in the decades to come regarding politics. That's it. We'll see you next time.